Welcome to our politics podcast. We thought we wanted to have a conversation. We thought, what would we have a conversation about? Well, what do people like to talk about?
Money, sex, and power.
Money, sex, and power. So we did money. We're going to do sex. Right now, we're going to do power. So that's what we want to do. I'm Alex Plato. I'm a professor at Franciscan University.
And I'm Andrew Jones, also a professor at Franciscan, and both of us are fellows at New Polity.
Yep. So we want to start this conversation. It's going to be all about power. So why do we want to start with that? And what's the need for really having this conversation, you think?
Yeah, I mean, politics is chaotic, isn't it? I mean, I think It's extremely confusing, extremely distressing. I feel like most people are just sort of spinning and have no idea.
They feel like they don't fit, like right, left. People on the right are like, I don't feel, there's something wrong with this. People on the left is like, doesn't quite fit.
Right.
It doesn't go deep, right? But everybody's super animated about it. They want action. They want to do something. They feel like they should be able to contribute. Right. They feel kind of, I think, in a certain way, and undirected.
I think a lot of the confusion that's going on is that we don't have a clear picture of what politics is or are. I don't know if we pluralize it or not. And also of what it means to have a Christian politics.
Exactly.
Right. So historically, in the last 70 years or so, what has happened is that Christianity has been presented, or it has really been taught, I think tragically, by the pastoral church in a way that it doesn't offer any sort of fundamental political framework. It doesn't offer any sort of real vision for a political order, right, but is rather something that can be fit conveniently in to the secular politics that are going on.
I mean, I think that's true, even though like some denominations or some Christian groups like have overt political things to say.
Sure.
But what you said, I think is a good thing to dwell on, is there's not a fundamental vision offered, not a principled philosophical kind of vision offered by Christianity. It's sort of, they fit in, as you said. Now, you're right, it's sort of, there's a little department fit in that kind of fits on the surface, even though I think some of the participants think, no, I'm saying something really important because I'm pro-life.
Right, exactly. But what the way it is actually formed, the way it actually presents itself is, I'm, say, a center-right, I have center-right political views, and I'm aligned with a whole bunch of other center-right people. And then on these particular issues, because I'm Catholic, I have a sort of somewhat idiosyncratic belief as far as the rest of my party is concerned.
Yeah, you're kind of like right, center, asterisk.
So maybe I'm right of center. I'm a Republican. I generally think that Republicans' party platform is correct. I generally think it's the right way of ordering things. I don't really make very much reference to my Christianity within all those beliefs. Yeah. And then maybe somewhere along the line, I think, but we really should have some sort of social safety net. Right. Because why? Well, because I'm a Christian, and Christians care about the poor, and it's good. Or maybe I'll have, if I'm like a really committed Catholic, maybe I'll say, well, maybe we should reconsider the death penalty. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and my fellow Republicans are like, what? That's weird. And you're like,
the basic fundamental thing is already there. And you can just kind of carve it up a little bit, like modify the given that's already there.
And that is that Christianity, then the principles, what tends to happen is that it's reduced to these particular so-called moral issues.
Yes.
Right. And so the church has presented itself as really, I think, presented itself to the world since World War II, I think, as offering interventions in very narrow
because
instances.
It's only competent to speak about morals and dogma, right? And politics is already sort of separated from that. Yeah, in our kind of fundamental assumptions and worldview. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're kind of center right or you're center left, and you're a Christian. You tend overwhelmingly to agree with your party, and then to insert Christianity here or there idiosyncratically, and your party tends to forgive you that. Right, because you're an ally on the other issues, and I think that this is a tragic situation, and it's really obscuring and denying the radicalness of the Christian vision, right? Because it really is a vision that it's from top to bottom, right? I mean, of humanity and our order as a whole, and I think part of the fundamental problem, one of the fundamental problems, is that we've lost sight of what politics is.
Right. I think we've lost that architectonic philosophical view because we're stuck in an ideological way of thinking where all the terms, the language game, so to speak, the moves we make in conversations is already programmed by a previous ideology that ultimately is anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, right? And I think that's why we're here at New Polity trying to think through these things,
Right.
There's something more radical. Christ came, right? Not just to save souls out of this world order, right? But to redeem and transform this whole order from the bottom to the top.
All of it.
Right? Socially, individually, politically, everything.
Yes.
And so he didn't leave anything out. He's the king. That's what that means.
That's right. Yeah. So, we have, like you mentioned, that we're kind of trapped in these ideological discourses and these language games. And this can create a very misconstrued understanding of the church's teaching on politics, so what's sometimes called Catholic social teaching, or Catholic social doctrine, and it often presents the impression to people that the church's teaching is this sort of hodgepodge, sort of middle of the road, third way, or of some sort. So it takes
a mixture, so to
certain
speak.
pieces from the left, certain pieces from the right, and then sort of puts them together in a way that it doesn't make anyone happy.
Yeah.
And the reason why it presents itself that way to people, or the reason why people perceive that, is because they're living in that surface level language game.
Yes.
Right. And so they're viewing the institutions, the state, the private companies, economics, all of these things
all the words that
as
we hear.
The fixed categories of the discourse, and then saying, well, what does the church say about the price mechanism? What does the church say about this, about that?
About equality, about racism, about whatever.
Exactly. As if it's another political party within that order, and as if it has a party planks or platforms, and not understanding that what the church is actually doing is, the magisterial church anyway, has been doing most often, is going beneath all those to the fundamental anthropological, cosmological, and moral principles, and then working out. And when you work out, then to then say things about the current world, you say things that the partisans view as inconsistent. Right?
Doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit in either one, but that's because they're not understanding that it's not yet another party in the same game, but is rather speaking a different language. Right. And so I think the place where we begin in sort of unpacking that, what that language is really to try to scrape away all that debris, that sort of historical debris, and get to the fundamental principles.
I think it's hard. I think it's really hard sometimes to imagine like how fundamentally different it is to think from the ground up. As a philosopher, like when I teach, I think I'm teaching principles so that anything you hear, any conversation you have, books you read, videos you watch, whatever, you have a fundamental way of thinking from the ground up, from principles. And the principles make sense kind of logically, and they're ordered logically. I mean, that's the way I think of it as a philosopher. And the way we encounter that is there's certain words, certain concepts, certain notions that have a controlling space within the dialogue. And I think what we want to do is work through some of those key ideas, notions, so that we have a framework where we can think from the ground up. We don't have to be captivated by any political ideology of any type, right, left, capitalism, socialism, nationalism, whatever. We don't have to be captivated by that. We can think about it, and we can have a clear view. And now we can finally, I think our own thoughts, as soldiers of Christ, think our own thoughts about these things so that we can take action with the energy and force that we feel like we should, that we should contribute to this team we're on, which is our community. So how do we do that? We need to start with the fundamental notions. And I know that you want to talk about the fundamental notion the whole time that we're going to be talking about is power. So maybe kind of walk us through some of the key distinctions you think are important on that notion, and we'll start thinking about that.
Yeah. So if we just say, what is the principle that we're talking about when we talk about politics? I mean, even if we look at politics the way we normally speak about them, and if we understand what are we really talking about, like what we're really talking about is some people's power over other people. Right?
It's that simple.
It really is, right? So in the power, what do we mean by power? The ability to affect change.
Exactly.
Right? So the ability to change something from A to B, the ability to affect something is what we would think of as being power. And so when we talk about politics, we're talking about there's a fundamental moral principle, which is how should power be used, to what end ought it to be used. And then there develops from that, then once you answer that question, there is a like ever expanding number of questions about the efficacy of power, the psychology of human beings, the historical situation.
It ramifies out so fast.
What institutions wield what sort of power? I mean, it becomes this immensely complex political, prudential, architectonic question. All these questions.
Exactly.
But without that prior assessment of what is the game we're playing,
we got to get clear on that first, because then all that ramified discussion about all those things, which is really politics in the broad sense, will become clear, because we'll have this principle, this starting point, this sort of hub.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to think about when we talk about power, I guess, would be to talk about in a very, very simple way. Like when I say something, I want to get at here the complexity of the question of what is power. Because if you say something like, I have the power to walk across the room. Right. Like what we're saying is that I'm able to do that. Right. And that involves my control over my body. I think it involves my ability to perceive the room, my ability to perceive its length, its extent, my ability to have some sense of the truth of the world, the room, my ability to control my own body. And also then it also implicates the world itself, the room itself, because we're talking about what I have the power to do. Right. So you can't
do anything if you're not already in an environment, in a world, in a reality
in which I can act in these ways. So when I say I have the power to walk across the room, I'm saying that the room can support my weight.
Exactly.
For example, if it couldn't support my weight, I wouldn't have the power to walk across.
And there's not a wall there.
Yeah, right. Like it's open, it's free, it's strong enough to hold me. So when you start talking about what power people have, you are always talking about the world of possibilities in which they find themselves, right? So sometimes people will say politics is sort of the art of the possible, and I think that that's actually really accurate, right? So the what is possible to any given person in any given situation, we could think of as the power that he has.
Yes, I would like to expand out to make a point. It's like, it's not just possible for what's individual. That's sort of your analogy. There's a community in a certain place on the globe, right, in history, which is like the room. Right. So there's certain possibilities for what they can do. In that community, in that more local terrain, so to speak, right, and history. So it's not individuals, there's communities. What can communities do as communities? Right. So there's that element.
Yeah, totally. Right. So what's possible in one historical time and place is not possible in another.
Exactly.
The power that's available to some people is not available to another. And part of the philosophical complexity of that idea is that we build our worlds through power. Okay. So it has a sort of feedback loop. So when I act to change my world, I'm also, not only am I acting in the immediate sense to change whatever it is I'm changing in that immediate context, but in changing that, I'm also changing the matrix of possibilities for the next act. Right. So I've changed things. So now new things are possible. Right. I had power to build a wall in the middle of the room. Right. I've now that I've done so, I've changed what's possible in that room.
Exactly.
Right.
So the power dynamics are always changing. Right.
So whatever power we wield in any time and place is embedded in what I would call structures of power. Right. That have been built by other powerful people. Right. Okay. So it's not. So power then becomes embedded in the social. Right. And really in this sort of ever flowing or sort of dynamic, historical dynamic of the construction of our social worlds towards certain ends, right? Whatever it is we're pursuing. And so there becomes inertias within those things. There becomes paths of least resistance. It becomes more possible or easier to do certain things and much harder to do other things. But that's not necessary, right? Like in a sort of a philosophical sense or sort of ultimate sense, like those are contingent, those structures.
I want to step outside just for a second, like at a meta level. So I think that oftentimes in a kind of liberal assumption, right, the kind of ideology that's accepted for granted that kind of controls the conversational hubs we were talking about earlier. The assumption is that they've got the right terms and they're all neutral. It's like, you're an artist and here's a palette, and here's all the colors, and that's all there is, and that's all there
So how are we going to?
And I'll give you that. So like, go ahead and start using this.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the thing that liberalism, there's a kind of cloaking device it puts on itself, right, is that, you know, the language we use is one of those possibilities that you just mentioned.
Right.
So language itself, the terms we're using to talk about power and how we're talking about power is itself part of power. Right?
Exactly
so
right. Yeah.
We can't get out of that. So liberalism, which assumes it's neutral, that it's got this sort of purely rational, objective view that comes down from God.
Right, exactly right.
Right? That's not the case. Language itself limits our possibilities. And that's one reason why we're trying to bust out of the limited possibilities of liberalism and get past that.
So, I mean, one way of articulating that same point would be to say that political theory is always a part of politics.
Yes.
Right. So what the way
when you say part of politics, you mean like the practice of
politics.
Yeah. So say more about that. I really like that.
So there's we can divide politics, it seems to me, into practice and theory.
Yeah.
Right. And so practice is our actual use of power to affect some sort of outcome.
Yes.
Right. And then the theory would be our discussion of that use. And that includes how we should use it, not only in the sort of ought sense of the moral imperative of what we ought to do, but also what's effective, what's not effective, what the situation is, what the sort of layout of the world in which we live in, what the matrix of possibilities are. All of that is an aspect of theory, right? And so theory is capable of critiquing practice. It also is capable of motivating practice. It's constantly giving a sort of running commentary on practice.
But it itself is
practice.
Exactly.
Because when you are, and that itself is essential to understand, is that the theory is practice as well.
Yes.
Because what you're doing when you speak, right, is obviously wielding power.
Yes.
All right.
You're
so
bringing forward like
when
that, the wall analogy.
When I say things to you, I'm attempting to affect you, right? I'm saying things in a certain way and with a certain structure, a certain content that I'm attempting to convey to you to affect you in some way that I have a design on.
Why else would you be talking?
Why else would I do it? So I'm using power. I'm attempting to use power, right? And that's just the way language works. That's the way language is. And so theory, then, why do I talk about the world in the way that I do? What's my motivation, right? What end am I working towards when I restructure theoretically the political world in a certain
What is that end? Can you just say right at the beginning, like, what is the end? We're here, we're thinking about politics, we're practicing politics, we want to talk about power. What is the end? Right, the goal of all this, of our talk, right, of our life, politically speaking. So, right, how do you boil that down to a principle in politics?
Yeah. So, I think the principle that we're going to build off over the course of this whole series is that all power ought to be used for the common good.
Yeah. I mean, that right there should be like mind-blowing and paradigm shifting, because when we hear power structure, like power dynamics, that sounds like we're just capitulating to the kind of voluntaristic way, of totalitarianism. Like we're just going to use power. When I talk to you, I'm like using power, and I'm going to like just make you do what I want. And it's sort of like power has a negative. But
that's because because already the reason we feel that way is because we're already subject to the theoretical power of the modern framework, right? Because the modern framework is that all power is domination, right? And so when we talk
which is bad domination is a subspecies of the sin of pride.
Yeah, right. All power is effectively tyranny.
Yes, exactly.
And so
we're told.
Yeah. And so when you hear in the postmodern discourse, and you hear everything is structures of power, you got Foucault and Nietzsche and all these guys, exactly. and all of this, and they are all that all starts sounding to our ears like everything is violence.
Yes,
everything is
rationality,
is domination.
No everything is just reason's impotent. It's ultimately will, the will to power. That kind of idea.
Right, but in the simple assertion that all power ought to be used for the common good, we're already, to use a very, very overused word, like problematizing that, right? Like we're already saying.
But I remember that conversation we had in the past about the question Aquinas asked in the first part. I think it's question 90 something. Is there mastery? He said in the garden.
Would there be mastery?
Would there be mastery? In the garden, which is his word for power.
Yes.
Would there be power in the garden when there's no sin? And
would there be power of one man over another?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And his answer is really crucial. So this is sort of the next step. So once we establish all power ought to be used for the common good, then the next step there's multiple steps here. We're going to have to get to what is the common good? What is power? How does power work?
Exactly.
I mean, you can see how this just spins into a massive.
But we're going to have a hub.
Yeah. But we start with Aquinas here. So he says that there are two forms of power. I mean, he makes it very simple in the beginning. And you have what he has is the first form of power, which is what we would think of as like domination or servile. Like the power, the sort of relationship between a master and a slave. And the way he describes this is that the one who has power wields it over the weaker one, the weaker party, for his own good,
for his own self-interest,
his own interest, his own desire fulfillment. So he views the other, the weaker one, as an instrument.
And as in competition, so to speak, with his power. That's why he has to
So he's approaching the other person in the way in which he's useful for himself. Right. So this is to treat another human being essentially as a tool.
Merely a means,
which is to treat him as a slave, as a piece of property. Okay. So this form, and then Thomas says this necessarily hurts the weaker party. Right. Like, and he's,
even if he doesn't feel it, it is damaging him.
It damages him. It damages him. Ultimately. But it also hurts him. I think even Thomas is saying even immediately.
Immediately.
Because he's being forced to act against his own good. Right. And he knows that this is not in his good. And he's acting in a way that's not for his own good, which hurts. Okay. So that form of mastery, Thomas says, would not exist.
Of course
not. Right.
It's a result of something bad.
Now the thing is, of course, is that's the only form of mastery that the majority of modern political theory recognizes as being real. Okay. So Thomas says, no, that wouldn't exist. So what would exist? Well, the form of mastery where the one who has power wields his power for the good over the one over whom he wields it. Right. And then that's also the common good and for the common good as well.
Because of course it's good for him, but it's also good for him. And that the good of the other is the good of the self.
This is the radical nature of this different form of power is because what Thomas says is that this is the form of power that would exist in the Garden of Eden and is also the way he describes it is that it's how do we put it? It's the form of power that love basically, the way in which love manifests itself.
It's the power of love.
It's the power of love. Yeah. So if we care for the other over if we're using our power for the good of the other, this becomes it's a very subtle and very complicated idea. And I think to understand it, the best way to understand it would be to look at an example. So to look at one of the simplest examples would be like a parent with their child. Right. So father and son, let's say. So it's obviously the case that a father is more powerful than his son in our sort of everyday use of the word. Right. But if he's a loving father and he's a good father, he uses that power for the well-being of his son and not for his own well-being. So he uses power over his son for the good of the son. Now
can I pause for 1 second? Because I think there's something even more profound about the power of a father. And I remember a conversation we had in the past about this. And in a certain way, the power that a father has over his son is greater than that man's power is greater now that he's a father. Right, because he has a son.
Now that he has a son,
right? It's like a quarterback that doesn't have a line and receivers.
Right,
has a lot less power as a player than when he's got the line and the receivers.
Right,
so to speak. I mean, that empowers him, so to speak. So when we have a son, right, that empowers us greater. Love gives us more power than we would have had without that.
Right,
and it's fundamentally metaphysical. It's not just I think I have more power, and it's nice to think of that idea as having more power.
No, I think
literally. The fathers out there, you have a feeling that you can't erase of love towards your son, care for your son or your daughter, right? That it's there and it makes you stay up at night. It makes you, put yourself in pain. It makes you take risks. It makes you all those things.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So there's a metaphysical dimension. And I think with one step back too, is like you said, the kind of ideological framework atmosphere that we have sort of treats power as slavish, but not just that's the only power, but that's the only power that can be and will be. It's inevitable. It's default. Can't be changed.
Right.
And so they treat literally the fall of man as the original condition. Right?
Yeah.
So even though we talk about this question
or the fall of man being so complete that whatever was prior to it is meaningless.
Yes.
It's gone.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So total depravity.
Exactly. But I think even though that's sort of the assumption, it gets there where that's inevitable. I think there's still non-Christians, right? Like Nietzsche himself, who recognized power isn't just one kind. He did, of course, plump for that bad kind.
Yeah.
Right. But he recognized, right? He said there's power.
He says, he says power is always the power to either give or to take.
Yes.
Now he wants to then make the gift
to help or to hurt.
To help or to hurt.
Yeah.
But he wants then he's then going to push that gift giving back into the power of domination eventually. Right.
Yeah.
The reason that gifts are given is for glory, for honor, for the things that elevate you.
Right.
So
there's
nevertheless, he's recognizing that power is always the power to give or to take.
Yes.
But
so I got you off track on the father.
No, it's okay. Point. It's okay because that was a good. You're right. But what I want us to see here is that the loving power is not just a different end.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like we're talking about the same thing. Like it has the same sort of social form as the power of slavery. Mm-hmm. So it's not like
I slightly alter it,
but we just like aim it someplace different, but it's the same thing, right? Okay, because that would get us to the point where all Christianity has to offer to politics is a different terminus, a different end, but all the mechanisms and all the structures of politics would be identical, right? And some Christian political theorists make this mistake. I think it's very common, but rather, what happens in loving power is that power itself takes on a different form, a different social form. And I'm going to try to explain it. I'll try. So when a father loves his son, and so he puts his power in the service of the son, right? So the service of the son's good, the son's ends. Yes. It's no longer the father's ends that he's using his power to achieve, right? He's no longer
explicitly thinking about his son, his good,
he's no longer
affect his son.
Yeah, exactly. And so in a sense, he's donating his power to the son or giving it to the son. Because the son then, and this is complicated, I think, because we think, well, the kid doesn't know what his own good is. The kid doesn't. And so it's like, the part of the power that's being donated to the son is the father's understanding of what's good for the son.
That's right.
The father's virtue, the father's intellectual ability. These things are being, so he's looking at the son and saying, what would the son desire if the son knew everything I know? What would my son want if he understood his own
self,
the way I understand him? Because his son, of course, would want his own good. This is,
precisely.
And so he would want his own good. And so I'm going to give my power to him, including my ability to know better than he does what his own good is. Okay, but I'm not at that point. Then my power becomes the son's power. Including my theoretical power that we talked about, how theory is power, and and it's no longer mine. But
he loves because he was first loved. Like he is his existence empowered you, and then once you're there, you empower him. And there's this.
That's right. Yeah, but and the takeaway though, one of the takeaways is that neither my will nor his is simply being satisfied. Right. Like it's not like. To donate my power to the son is that whatever his childish whims are happen. That's to hurt him, right? That's actually to use my power not in the way the son would want me to use it, right? If he knew everything I know, right? He would know, but if he knew everything I know, he would know better than that, right? So you power becomes decentered. It's not really clear who has it.
Diffused.
Right? It becomes diffused in the situation, and it becomes, and then of course the objective. Then think of a loving father. So
it's like the exact opposite of when we think about anger as a vice, and we contemplate our own self in an examination of conscience, and or read other moral theologians about anger. Like when we get angry and that there's that power that we want, it's like a hammer is being formed.
Right.
And we're ready to, it's concentrating power so that we can use violence. And this kind is the exact opposite. It doesn't concentrate to forcefully do whatever my will is in my own self-interest, but it spreads out and grows, right? And gets bigger and expands.
Yeah. So
and ennobles and dignifies.
That's exactly right. So that's where I was going to go is that in the first form of power, the power of domination, like you said earlier, it's competitive.
Yes.
Right. And there's scarcity. So my slave's relative power minimizes mine.
Yes.
my relative power, minimizes his. I seek to, and in that form of domination or power, I seek to amass as much power as I can, right? Which is simultaneously the pushing of the people I surround into ever greater servitude towards me, right? But the loving form of power increases. It's non-competitive. It increases and diffuses power, but without minimizing the power. It's not like the father then becomes weaker, right? This is the thing, and this is the thing that the modern framework, I think, basically can't understand. It's like, so let's say a loving father. What is his objective? What is he doing? Well, he's trying to grow his son, trying to build his son into a powerful person in his own right, right? Like you were saying, trying to build him into virtue, trying to build him into understanding, build him into knowledge, to build him into a man who himself can now wield the maximal amount of power that he is capable of. But in doing that, so now does the father grow weaker as the son grows stronger? And it's like, well,
it's not a zero-sum game.
It's exactly the opposite. Not only does it not diminish the father's power, but it in fact increases it. Because what happens to the son as he grows more virtuous? Let's just think, what is his orientation towards his father? Now, if you have people who have a very healthy relationship with their fathers would understand this, right? Like, as you grow older, you become, in a sense, more equal to your father, like more peers, but is that like, just think of it in a very like practical sense, like your father has a bunch of sons, and as they grow, what sort of social power does he wield? Like, as they grow more powerful and more loving, and it's a loving relationship, so they're more obedient to him, and not obedience in a servile way or in a childish way,
more able to honor him,
but obedient in a human, fully developed human free way. He actually wields more power, because now he can call upon these sons, right? And these sons are themselves powerful, right? And so his donating of power it's not just a minimizing of it. It's actually an increasing.
I think that concept is another one of those paradigm shifting ideas, right? That as the love is true, right, and genuine and good, that father gets more powerful. Like it's obedience, so to speak, that gives him that empowerment, right? And I think that people often say, how are we going to make changes in this political? Are we going to go top down? Are we going to go bottom up? How's this going to work? Like, are we going to go populism? Is that's the only way? Are we going to do some sort of government programs? And it's this simple divide. But I think this, to me, is a paradigm shifting thing, because the bottom, right, which is the people obeying, is what gives the top power. So there is you can't have just top down or just bottom up. Truly, it's like us as a team, right, are empowering everybody, and some of those people are rulers. So
let's think about this. Like, why does a slave obey his master? Why does, I actually use the word obey loosely. Why does he submit? Why does he do what his master says?
I think in most situations in human history, fear. And it could be either fear of punishment, or I think a version of fear is a promise of reward. Right. But some sort of anxiety that then is being satisfied, right, in one way or the other, some sort of discontent. Right. And so, but let's just say fear for simplicity's sake. So the slave obeys out of fear. Well, the fear is the fear of losing something that the slave loves. Something good.
All right. So what that means is that the power of the tyrant is always secondhand. Right. So the power that he can only bring to bear the power of the slave to the extent that in the slave's calculation, right, the fear outweighs the good, the love. Right. Now, a loving father doesn't have that problem. He can call to bear the totality of his son. Right. The whole man is now ordered in obedience within the family. Right. And so the relationship is more powerful because it's not competitive. And so it pulls, it's actually based upon the positive rather than the negation. Right. So it's a more powerful structure.
If the whole man is brought to bear, to me, that idea is very deeply theological too. I mean, we're in the image of God. When all of us is brought to bear on anything, that is God acting in the world through us. That is God's action. Well, this is the reason.
This is the reason why the tradition endlessly, just consistently speaks of all power as divine mediation of power.
And that obviously isn't like that servile Nietzschean like will to power structure. That's like
they mean real power, true power. Right. Not this sort of false power that is the consequence of sin. The reality of sin. Okay, so one of the things we're talking about though is that the way we conceptualize politics changes, because loving power, the power that is for the weaker party, we might say, produces a form of decentered power,
yes,
of diffused power that is nevertheless a stronger unity.
Yes.
Right? Like the diffusing of power is an aspect of the unity.
It's almost like the power spreading. It's a spread power, right? Because diffusing almost sounds like you're kind of like diluting.
Better. I don't mean that. Yeah.
But I know what you mean, because we start in this world of modern states, right? Power's radically centralized, and we need to devolve that power. We need to diffuse that power out again. Right. And so it's true, and it can grow. Right. So we want to spread the power, and we want the power to grow and be organic like that. And I think, all true power comes from God. So it's like God's action through love, right? Spreading through the community. We want politics to be about that. We're not idealists. It's not some like wish that we have that's unreal, that's not achievable, that's merely idealistic. Right. And I think that's what's hard for us to believe. We're in this political order where we think that the options are basically like this sort of thing, which isn't that great, and this sort of thing, which isn't that the great, and the stuff in the middle, which isn't sort of the great. And we just advance our own personal ideals and sort of just accept this as kind of, Right. But we want this to be, no, Christ can live. Christ can be the center of our politics, of our community. That's real. That's really possible. Not only is it really possible, it's actually happened. It's actually the real structure of the worlds that we really live in. Yes.
Right. So like we gave that example of the slave always being afraid of losing something he loves.
Yes.
So that kind of power, that form of power, which we tend to think is politics, is always actually parasitical on the sort of power that we find in the relationship of a loving father and his son. Right. So you got
to explain that more. How's that parasitical? How does it depend on that in a certain way?
Why does a soldier go fight for a tyrant in his army? Because he loves his family.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. He wants to defend something he loves.
He wants to defend something he loves, or he loves his fellow soldier, or he loves
his fatherland,
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Right. But the violence itself is never the thing that marshals human power. Right. Or the sort of that doesn't make sense.
Right. I see.
And so you have, one of the things that we need to do is learn to see in the world the real foundation of our order, right? To the extent that we have order, right? And as we destroy those foundations, as we weaken those foundations, we're going to slide into ever increasing disorder, right? And into ever increasing war, which is sort of the absence. Actual violence is the place where you see the lack of those goods.
So I guess I was kind of, when I first heard you say that, I kind of had a gut reaction, which was maybe based on an assumption. I had a liberal assumption. Like I find these in myself as I try to think through these. There's still roots in there. Is that this kind of, you said there's two powers. So in a certain way, we might think that's like yin and yang. There's like a bad kind and a good kind, and they're like always there and they're kind of equal. We just prefer this one. What we're saying is no. This is kind of fake. This is a fake power. That's it's fake. It looks like power because it borrows some of the stuff from true power. I mean, in a certain simple it steals it. In a simple anthropological way, it's like the tyrant uses his will. God made the will. The will's a good thing, right? But it's meant to be ordered in a certain way according to God and all the things he made, right? But it can be used not in that order, right? But it can still be used, right? So the will itself, right, as God made it, is intrinsically good and the source of power, right, over other people. And so I think I see now. I think I made I wandered out of that dead end, I think.
Yeah, no, that it's a very important point, because what it allows us to see, I think, so what we're talking about is the priority of love, or the priority of peace, the priority of truth, the priority of goodness. I mean, this just gets back to basic sort of metaphysical,
our kind of transcendental
metaphysical
which principles. I think people that think politics think that stuff that's all irrelevant.
I know
that doesn't come to bear. That doesn't have anything to do with politics.
Right. I know. I think
that's another conversation for philosophy class or something. Right. Or theology or some personal ideals or worldview or something. Right. It's not real. It doesn't have power.
Yeah. And it because of that, it obscures for them an understanding of our current social political situation. So here's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
We live in a world. So we think politics, we think the state.
Yes.
We think politics, we think okay, but that itself,
state, the arrangement, the forms, the
that
policies,
itself is the power of the ideological construction. So you're talking about how theory has power.
Yes.
Right? Like, so they've told us that.
Yes.
And then we've
heard it in every
and we've heard it so many times that
to.
now we think that there's this division between the public and the private.
Yes.
But the public and the private is an aspect of ideological power.
Yes.
Like, they've created that division so that they can then say all that lovey stuff, all that kind of like ultimate ends and values and good, that's private stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Right? But the public stuff, the political stuff is this coercive, violent domination
structures
world.
that are put in place by power to control things.
Yep. And that power can be sort of neutral towards the private one, the value, and
supposed to be anyway.
But once we see how the power of the loving Father is actually prior to and the foundation on which the power of domination is the only way it can function, we start to see that the political order that we're living in, like our actual political order, is the order of all that private stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the order of morals, it's the order of families, it's the order of friendship networks, it's the order, right? And now and then it also includes what we talk about as politics, so the state. Yeah. It also includes the police. It also includes the military, but there's no sort of barrier other than a really arbitrary and contingent sort of categorical barrier that's been drawn because of a particular ideology between public and private.
But I also notice in that little bit you were saying is it's actually reversed that previous notion that we were just kind of talking about. Is I think the private sort of like where love and, like you said, that kind of stuff, which is actually the real power, depends on the political, which is this fake power. So they've actually inverted it. They think that that's
what liberalism has done.
Love depends on real power, depends on fake power. I mean, that's what's going on. They've reversed the parasitic relation.
That's right.
My love, my ability to follow God and like my religion is dependent on this modern, neutral, liberal state that allows me to do that. So it, so to speak, is the superior power. It's the basic power, the dependent. Everything else is dependent on it. It's completely just reversed it.
That's what they've done.
It's upside down.
So if you look at a Christian political order, in historically speaking, like Middle Ages, Christian political order, the order of, or the actions of violence, the use of violence, which is necessary because of sin. Yeah. Which we could talk about.
No, we have to definitely talk about that.
But maybe next time.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that soon.
That becomes an aspect of a political order that is based upon the loving form of power. Yeah. Okay. So the order itself emerges out of this sort of diffused or spread power, where there's different organizations, different families, different associations, different groupings, different communities,
organic, ever-growing
that have all these sort of power, and they're all related to each other through systems of honor and morality, cooperation, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then there's violence, because violence is necessary. So you have to use violence, but violence
necessary in this order,
in this world in which we live, and that then flows out of those structures. Yes. And what you're talking about is exactly right, is that what modernity has done is reversed that. Yes. Okay. So the structure, any sort of non-violent social order is now underneath the umbrella of this ubiquitous violent order that holds the world in being, so that those things can be there. Yeah, exactly. And those things themselves, to the ideologues, aren't real. Yeah. I mean,
they're fake. Those are fake.
Yeah, so
there's the little toys that the children can play with, whereas we're the big guy. We'll take care of them,
and we can describe their little structures of positive power. Those little structures of positive power in a totally negative sense. Yeah. So we can describe it as individual actors seeking their self-interest, negotiating based upon juridically defined rights and private property. Yeah. For example.
Yeah. No. Definitely.
Which is we can describe their behavior within the framework of power as domination. Yes. And we don't need power as love to make sense of our world.
That's irrelevant.
Right.
And I think that's how I would say one of the biggest results of liberalism, modernism, what I would call post-Christianity, right, is that all of our social institutions have become what this term I really like called practical atheism.
That's right. Yeah.
We talk about systemic racism, and that's a big problem. And what do we do about that? Well, I think the real problem is systemic atheism, meaning the institutions are formed in a way, right? That makes belief in God, that makes Christianity irrelevant. You can believe in God if you want, but you don't have to. You can be a Christian if you want, but you don't have to. That's sort of like irrelevant. That's nice. I mean, more than 50% of people believe in God, but are our institutions theistic? Are we systemically theistic? Even systemically deistic? No, we're systemically atheistic. And I think that that's the evidence.
Which means systemically violent.
Systemically violent.
Right.
Exactly. I think that's a good place maybe to drop off for today.
Okay.
I think that we've like hit some of the key ideas. Kind of got maybe an interest in this, and we have politics as being about power and these two different kinds of power.
Right.
I mean, I think it seems like this is kind of abstract, and we were talking about, human anthropology and metaphysics and some kind of like things that seem abstract and not necessarily connected. But I think as soon as we get to some of those other concepts that we want to hit on, right? The fundamental sort of philosophical notions that form the language, right, by which to think and act truly politically, right, for Christ, for his good kingdom, right? I think when we get that, we'll see how to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think we've already made progress here because just the simple notion of power as being that it ought to be for the common good, we're already undermining the categories, the way in which we divide up power. So an obvious example would be there's a sort of conundrum going on in political discourse right now about what to do about people like organizations like Twitter or Facebook or something like that. And the biggest problem is like, well, it's private. Public, private. And it's like power.
Right.
It's powerful. Right. Power ought to be used for the common good.
Right.
Okay, so there we begin.
Yes.
So now let's look at Twitter.
That's perfect.
Right?
I like that.
Okay.
So I think if you guys like this conversation so far, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to donate, go for that too. We love having these conversations. We hope to see you next time and continue our conversation. Of course, all we want to talk about is really money, power, and sex. We're going to leave money to the good money guys, right? Sex, that'll come eventually, but we'll stick with power for now. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.